Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Abby Fuller. I work on the containers team at Amazon Web Services, or AWS. I'm pretty jet lagged, so try not to hold that against me. I flew in a couple hours ago. I was going to make an announcement about DevSecCon, but they stole my thunder. So I can't make an announcement about that anymore, but I'll be announcing the winner at the end of this. So after all of the technical talks and before the kind of networking happy hour, I will announce the winner for the whole DevSecCon hashtag extravaganza. So without further ado, I think we have a lot of talks already, right, on what are containers, why are they great, why should we be using them, but with kind of the move over to containers comes a lot of work, right? And it's scheduling and resource usage and service meshes and deployments and resource usage and monitoring and observability and logging. It's a ton of work, right? And it's more work than I think that people expect kind of before they get started with containers, right? Because you see all these talks, right? You see that everyone's making the move to containers and microservices, and you see, OK, well, I should do that too. But it's not always so easy. And with the move to containers comes a lot of extra work. So that's all that scheduling and resource usage and service mesh problems and everyone arguing over Istio, which I still don't quite get the argument. But even when it's your entire job to keep up with the container space, it can still be really overwhelming. And it can be a little difficult to figure out, OK, so what's actually important? What's that thing that I need to focus on over all of these other things? Out of all of these services and blog posts and products out there, what's the actual thing that I need to focus on? And it seems like every day, right, there's a new blog post, there's a book, there's a talk, there's a new tool, there's a new framework. Every day there's something else. So how am I supposed to figure out what's actually important for me? And I think that that's really difficult, right? And even for someone who's literally their entire job is to keep up with what's happening in the container space, it can be really hard to not only figure out what's relevant for me, but what's relevant in general. What are the things that I should actually focus my attention on when I have so many options? And I think my point here is that you don't have to do this by yourself. You don't have to kind of figure out what the right service is, what the right tool is, what the right product is just on your own. You can get by with a little help from your friends. And I mean this two ways. So the first one is through your tooling and your processes. So your tools are your friends. And then the second part is through your community. So you have person friends. So what people in the community can you ask these questions of? Can you ask clarification questions of? Can you say, hey, I'm thinking about using this. How would you use this? So I think there's two pieces here. There's the tooling and their processes, and there's also the community. So first things first, let's talk tools. So in other words, how can you work smarter and not harder? So I think that this is really kind of applicable to everyone, right? So how can I work less, but a little bit smarter? So work a little bit more focused, work a little bit smarter, but without just putting in more of the brute force effort. So for me, the first thing here is safety first, right? So I want to make sure that I'm safe and secure before and above anything else. So if you're working with AWS, this means probably IAM roles. So how can your services and you perform actions securely? So for us, that means IAM roles. That means that you're a service role. So what can your service do on your behalf? User roles, they represent a person. So what can a person do on their own behalf, and what can they access? So if my name is Abby, which it is, and I have administrator access, what does administrator access mean? A group. If I have a group of administrators, so AWS employees, what can that group of employees do on my behalf? And beyond that, what happens when I have secrets, right? So storing secret keys and passwords it's probably worth a whole conversation on its own, right? Because everyone does this differently. Everyone has something where maybe they use KMS, or maybe they store things actually as environment variables, which I don't recommend. Or maybe they have their own homegrown thing, or maybe they use Vault. But everyone has some way internally where they store their secrets. And that's probably worth a whole conversation on its own, right? So how can you store secrets and still work with containers? So a couple of general words of advice. So one, rotate them. Don't share them between services and also humans. Principle of least access, right? So as a person or as a service, I should get the least amount of access that's possible. So if I only need access to DynamoDB and S3 to do my job, I should only have access to DynamoDB and S3. I shouldn't have DynamoDB and S3 and also EC2 just because my coworker Rick needed access to EC2. I should only have access to those services that I individually need. And you should do that on a very specific basis, right? So everyone, every service only has access to those things that they specifically need. Where possible, store those keys somewhere else, and then control access. So you might store them in KMS and then control access to those via IAM roles or service roles. Or you can use a third-party tool. So Vault, I think, is a good example of that. Or you have tools that help with the security of the container themselves. So you have things like the Aqua microscanner or the continuous image assurance tool, or you have the Docker security scan, or you have Claire from CoreOS. They're all looking for vulnerabilities in the container themselves. So as part of your build system, as part of your kind of build tools, you can make sure that you have the security that you need. If we're thinking about security, though, we have to go from the bottom up, right? So good development, it starts locally. So start with standardized, easy to set up local environments from the very beginning. That eliminates something that I think is really important for us, right? Which is the whole, like, it works on my machine, right? So if my machine is set up a certain way and it works for me and I develop that feature, then I'm like, works for me, like, it's fine. But if other people have their machines set up a different way, then it doesn't work for them. And if production's set up a different way, if staging is set up a different way, it doesn't work for them. So the more that we can standardize things from the development environment onwards, the more that we can kind of eliminate the whole, well, it works for me, but not for anyone else. So some common approaches to this, Vagrant or VirtualBox, an EC2 box with local access. A couple of things that you want to have in common, right? So shared configuration by team members. So in general, that might mean that I can download the same kind of template to run a local environment, and regardless of what team I'm on or what I'm working with, I can set up that same environment. So whether it's a Vagrant box template or something else, I can start from the beginning, regardless of what team I'm on, and it gets as close as possible to the production environment. So there's not like, well, this is kind of a replica of the staging environment. The whole point is that it's as close as possible to the production environment, right? That I want to test things as much as I can against the production environment rather than a staging environment, because testing against the production environment is how I know whether something works in real life for my customers or not. So some tools that might help you out. So Vagrant, AWS Cloud 9, so a cloud development editor that will let you integrate a shell plus access to AWS resources. If you're running with Kubernetes, you can do that locally with Minikube. There's some other options there as well. But how can you run things locally and replicate as closely as possible your production environment? But from local environment to production environment, you probably interact through CLIs. So your CLI depends on your orchestration platform. So a couple different ones. So on the AWS side, ECS and Fargate. So there's AWS CLI and the ECS CLI. They're both official. AWS CLI is the official one that kind of supports all the different services. So from Lambda to RDS to ECS, the ECS CLI is official as well, but just for ECS, but it supports Docker Compose. So if that's a format that you're into, you can do that way. There's also some good unofficial ones, the Fargate one or the Cold Brew CLI. For Kubernetes, you get a bunch of different options. So kubectl. Also, you have things like kops or kubeadmin. Not production ready, but also cool, kubecorn. So lots of different ways that you can interact with your production or not production Kubernetes clusters in the kind of the same way that you interact with your AWS resources. So once you're kind of interacting with your clusters versus CLIs, I think the next step is kind of automation, right? Because no one really wants to sit there and think like, I guess I should scale up the number of nodes in my cluster now. No one really wants to do that, right? And in production, chances are you're doing that through the CLI, right? You're doing that through your build tool. So no artisanal containers. So treat your infrastructure as code. So automate and template everything from your containers to your infrastructure. Make everything repeatable, make everything portable. Build your containers directly from your repositories as part of your CI/CD system. After that, automate your AWS. That could be something like CloudFormation. That could be something like Terraform. That could be something like CloudFormer if that's what you wanted to use. Tons of different options out there. But the main point here, right, is that you don't want to be doing this by hand. You don't want to think that every time you need to add a new server, you need to add something by hand. If you're not into the whole JSON thing, you can look at Terraform. They're all solving a really similar problem, right, which is resource management. So how can I make all of these things standard, but make sure that I can deploy them when I need to scale up, and make sure that everything is exactly the same. So no more snowflake infrastructure, just make sure that I can keep scaling it up. Once you're all automated, you're using CLIs, you thought about security. How do you know that everything else is working? That takes you to monitoring and observability. So that's what helps you, A, debug, and then B, understand what's happening in your actual system. So I put a quote in here from Charity Majors, and I think that the idea here is not only to understand what the actual error message is, but understand what that means for your system itself. So understanding, like, what does that actually mean? So when this thing doesn't work, when I don't quite understand here, here's what that means for my system, not just this error message, but here's what that actually means. So you want actual, usable, helpful information about what's happening. I think something from personal experience, right, is if it doesn't make sense to you at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's not helping you a whole lot, right? So if it's not something that you can understand quickly or that someone new can understand really quickly, it's probably not doing you a whole lot of good, right? It's probably overly complicated or it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So a couple things to think about. So one, reduce the noise. If it's one of those things that if you're on call and you look at it and you say, oh, this can wait till tomorrow, it probably shouldn't have woken you up. So page only on things that require immediate emergency attention. You need both of those. So monitoring and observability, so that means more than just logs. So seeing things like how much disk space am I using? How much memory am I using? How much am I using across this whole cluster rather than just one piece? And make sure that you're answering the right questions. You don't have to do this alone. So there's lots of tools out there that can help you kind of do this a little bit more easily. So things like honeycomb.io or Assistig or New Relic or X-Ray. There's lots of tools there for you to be able to do that without kind of doing all the work yourself. With the caveat being that you have to use the right tool for the job. So don't do everything yourself when you don't have to, but don't be afraid to customize things on your own when there isn't a tool out there that works for you. So that might be something like tweaking your own tool when you need something that's not quite there and the defaults. It could be something like tweaking the load balancer or tweaking the auto-scaling group settings for faster deployments. It could be something like bringing your own custom AMI or controlling something through EC2 user data, don't be afraid to, when you don't have a tool that works for you out of the box, to do something on your own that does actually fit what you want to do outside of the box. Here's an example. So if you're following along after this with how to use ECS with a custom AMI, you do not have to look at all of this now, but if you're looking at this later, this is how you might be able to import and use a custom AMI. So things like custom Docker flags or custom packages or something that you want to run as a daemon process versus a regular process, you can do that here. You can pretty much customize anything via bash through EC2 user data. So anything from starting services to stopping services to enabling and supporting things that aren't supported through the UI. You run these scripts at boot, and you can modify them through the EC2 console. It's called EC2 user data. So here's an example of echoing something straight into etc sysconfig Docker that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Obviously, do this responsibly. There's not a good way to make this not mess up your stuff if you don't do it right. But you can support pretty much anything this way if you're careful. But ultimately, your best resource is the community. So that's all those people. That's all those people that are sitting here right now, except for Rick, who's making a face at me. For all the people that are sitting here or that are sitting next to you at work or are sitting virtually next to you in a Slack group or another meetup, that's your best option, right? These people, you're very rarely working on a problem that's a part of a vacuum that you're working on and that no one else has ever seen before. So a great resource is to be able to talk to those people that are around you, ask questions, ask for help, say, hey, I'm stuck on this and I need help. There's so many vibrant resources that are here to help you. So talk to your peers and your colleagues and your internet friends, write a blog, give a talk, come to conferences or meetups just like this one. But so many options for where you can both share what you're working on, good gifts, I know, where you can both share what you're working on, but to talk to other people about what they're working on too, because it's very rarely something that I'm working on something that no one has ever seen before. Chances are everyone can learn from something that you've worked on as well. If you don't know how to get started, or if you're struggling, or if you're stuck, if you need help, some resources to get you started. So meetups or user groups like this, you can join the Kubernetes community call with Chris Nova and Joe Bita. You can join a SIG group. That's a special interest group so something that AWS involved in would be the AWS SIG group. You can find AWS user group, which is something like this. Or you can join one of approximately 1 million Slack channels, just like this one, for a community that works for you. There's an AWS developer Slack channel, which for my sins, you can either email me and ask to be included, or you can DM Rick Harvey, and he'll help you get in. So there's lots of opportunities here to talk with other kind of AWS and containers folks if you'd like a little bit of community help. I'll answer a couple questions now if you'd like, or I'll be hanging out the rest of the meetup. My computer thinks it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, so I'm not sure what time it actually is, because I also think it's 3 o'clock in the morning. But I'll answer a couple questions now if you'd like, or if I've already gone way over time, I will answer questions afterwards as I'm hanging out back there. And maybe Itzhak will rescue me at some point and tell me whether I should be answering questions an hour later. He looks like he's ready to rescue me.
Thank you so much. Round of applause for Abby.